Picture a crowded medieval marketplace. Merchants shout over one another, children dart between stalls, and the smell of bread mingles with sweat and smoke. Suddenly, the noise shifts. Heads turn, laughter ripples through the crowd. A woman is being dragged forward. Her face is encased in a grotesque iron cage, an iron bridle locked around her skull, its sharp spike pressing down on her tongue. Each step makes the bells on the mask jingle, calling attention to her humiliation. She dares not speak. Even the attempt would slice her flesh. She has not stolen. She has not murdered. Her crime was speaking too much, gossiping, or arguing with authority. For this, she is made a public warning. Crowds jeer, children mock, men laugh. Her suffering is turned into theatre, her body into a stage. This was not an isolated act, but part of a broader system. Across Europe and beyond, women were forced to wear painful devices in public iron corsets, shame masks, heavy chains, each designed not just to punish, but to humiliate. Why did societies create tools that inflicted pain in the open, transforming humiliation into entertainment? To answer, we must uncover the devices, their meaning, and their haunting legacy. The iron bridle clamped on a woman's face was only one of many instruments societies used to transform disobedience into public spectacle. Behind their cruel design lay a clear purpose: to make pain visible, to ensure humiliation echoed louder than screams. Each device turned the female body into a message, announcing to the crowd that silence, obedience, and submission were virtues enforced not just in private, but in public squares. The most notorious of these was the scold's bridle, also called the brank. Forged from heavy iron, it encased the head like a cage, a strap locked beneath the chin, while plates pressed against the cheeks. The cruelest feature was the spike or flat plate inside, designed to press against or pierce the tongue. Women accused of gossiping, nagging, or disturbing the peace were forced to wear it, their voices mutilated into silence. Some versions included bells attached to the frame, ensuring every step drew attention, magnifying her humiliation. Another tool was the iron corset, sometimes called the discipline corset. Unlike fashionable stays worn by noble women, these were brutal cages of metal wrapped around the torso. Some versions had spikes facing inward, digging into flesh with every breath or movement. Others were simply unbearably heavy, designed to exhaust the body. Women accused of sexual immorality, vanity, or rebellion were forced to wear them beneath clothing, their beauty turned into imprisonment. The corset symbolized femininity twisted into punishment, turning curves into cages. Equally degrading were chains and shackles clamped around wrists, ankles, or necks. Women could be chained in marketplaces or made to walk through town dragging heavy weights. The clanking of iron amplified their disgrace, making every step echo with judgment. Shackles were often paired with stocks or pillories, forcing women to stand immobilized while crowds ridiculed them. Though men also faced chains, for women the punishment carried an added symbolism, reduced from companions or wives to beasts burdened under metal. Perhaps the most bizarre were shame masks. Crafted from iron, leather, or wood, these grotesque masks were shaped like pigs, donkeys, or demons. Each mask caricatured the woman's supposed sin. A gossiping wife might wear a mask shaped like a long tongue. A nagging woman might wear one with exaggerated jaws. Holes allowed for breathing, but not comfort. The mask transformed her into a living parody of her crime, paraded through town for ridicule. Children laughed, neighbors jeered, and the punishment seared humiliation deeper than any lash. These devices varied across regions, but their function was always the same: to erase individuality and replace it with caricature. A woman was no longer herself. She was the embodiment of gossip, disobedience, or vanity. Her suffering was not hidden but displayed, her punishment crafted for maximum visibility. The cruelty of these devices also lay in their duration. Some women were forced to wear bridles or masks for hours, others for days. Eating, drinking, and sleeping became torturous tasks. In certain towns, women were chained in marketplaces for entire market days, their humiliation stretched into spectacle for all who passed. The pain was physical, but the true wound was social, the irreversible stigma of being paraded as a public lesson. Ironically, the devices were often justified as moral correction. Authorities claimed that bridles cured women of gossip, that corsets disciplined vanity, that masks reformed behavior. But the reality was control. These punishments rarely targeted crimes of violence or theft. Instead, they targeted speech, independence, sexuality qualities that threatened patriarchal order. Devices of public shame enforced silence where words were feared, obedience where defiance lingered, and submission where autonomy dared to rise. The physical design of these tools reflected this logic. The bridle silenced the tongue, the corset constrained the body, the chains restricted freedom, and the mask erased identity. Each was both weapon and symbol, ensuring that the woman's humiliation was as visible as possible. The cruel ingenuity of these devices reveals how far societies went to police women. Pain alone was not enough. It had to be public, theatrical, unforgettable. For the punished woman, the suffering was unbearable. For the crowd, it was entertainment. And for the rulers, it was reassurance. Obedience was written not only in law but in iron. Punishment in medieval and early modern Europe was rarely confined to hidden chambers. Justice was not simply about correction, it was about performance. Town squares, marketplaces, and busy streets became stages where suffering was displayed, turning humiliation into communal ritual. And when women were forced to wear painful devices in public, the theatre of punishment was at its most cruelly effective. Imagine a Saturday morning market. Stalls overflow with vegetables, bread, and wool. Neighbors greet one another, children chase dogs, the church bells toll. Suddenly a new sound breaks through the sharp jingle of bells attached to an iron bridle. A woman shuffles forward, her head caged in iron, a spike pressing her tongue. She cannot speak, but the device makes her presence impossible to ignore. Shoppers turn, laughter spreads, and soon the punishment becomes the center of attention. Her body is no longer hers, it is the day's spectacle. Authorities deliberately scheduled these punishments during market days or festivals to ensure maximum audiences. The logic was simple. The more people who witnessed the shame, the more effective the lesson. Crowds gathered not reluctantly but eagerly. Public punishments were entertainment as much as discipline. The jeers, taunts, and mocking songs became part of the ritual. Children were encouraged to point and laugh. Merchants sold food nearby as if it were a fair. For the punished, every smile and laugh drove the humiliation deeper. The theatre was carefully choreographed. Women forced into scolds' bridles were sometimes marched through the busiest streets, accompanied by guards or eunuchs ringing bells. Shame masks were paraded with deliberate mockery, the grotesque features turning women into caricatures. Chains clanked as women stumbled along cobblestones, dragging heavy weights while neighbors jeered. These details mattered. The punishment was not only physical, it was symbolic performance meant to reinforce social order. Even the locations were symbolic. The marketplace was chosen because it represented the heart of community life. To be humiliated, there was to be humiliated before the entire town. Some women were forced to stand immobilized at crossroads where every passerby could watch. Others were tied to church doors, their suffering framed as moral lesson. The choice of stage amplified the message. Obedience was not private virtue, but public duty. The crowds, too, were participants. Public punishment blurred the line between justice and theatre because it relied on communal involvement. Spectators were not silent observers. They mocked, jeered, and sometimes threw filth. Rotten vegetables, mud, or even animal waste became props in the drama. In some cases, towns kept official stocks of projectiles to ensure the spectacle was complete. The punished woman's body became both target and stage, her humiliation sustained by the collective energy of the crowd. Punishments could last hours or days, stretching the theatre into drawn-out performances. Women forced into bridles or masks sometimes had to endure long marches across town, pausing at key points where officials read proclamations of their crimes. Each stop invited fresh ridicule, as though the humiliation needed constant renewal. In some towns, women were chained for entire market days, their suffering woven into the rhythm of commerce. Every transaction, every greeting was accompanied by the silent reminder of obedience. What made this theatre particularly cruel was its focus on women's voices. Men were punished publicly too through stocks, flogging or executions, but women were often singled out for talking too much, nagging, or spreading rumours. Their punishments were theatrical silences. The bridle forced their tongues down, the mask turned them into grotesques, the chains prevented movement. The very qualities that marked women as disruptive speech, independence, visibility, were attacked directly in public view. In this way, the theatre of punishment reinforced gender norms. A man punished for theft might be seen as a criminal. A woman punished for gossip was seen as a warning to all women. The spectacle extended beyond the individual, disciplining entire communities of wives, daughters, and mothers. Every spectator learned the same lesson. A woman's words could be her undoing. The ritual also reassured men. Watching women reduced to ridicule affirmed patriarchal authority. Husbands, brothers, and fathers could see their own frustrations enacted by the state. A wife who gossiped at home might not be punished by her husband, but if another woman was bridled in public, the warning still struck home. The theatre reinforced domestic hierarchies by making public obedience inseparable from private submission. The performances were often repeated. Chroniclers record cases of women paraded multiple times, each punishment escalating humiliation. In Scotland, records show women forced to wear bridles for days, paraded in markets morning and evening. In Germany, shame masks were common fixtures, applied again and again until obedience seemed permanent. The repetition ensured that the theatre never ended. Even when one performance was over, its echoes lingered in memory. Perhaps most haunting is how communities normalized this cruelty. Spectators did not see themselves as complicit in torture. They saw themselves as upholding order, even enjoying entertainment. The suffering of women became as routine as a market bargain or church sermon. This normalization is what made the theatre so effective. It turned cruelty into culture, embedding humiliation into the rhythm of daily life. At its core, the public theatre of punishment served two functions. It terrified women into silence, ensuring they policed themselves before speaking out. And it reassured communities that order was intact, that even the unruliest woman could be reduced to a spectacle of obedience. Pain alone was never enough. Humiliation had to be witnessed, mocked, and remembered. Only then did the theatre fulfill its purpose. The devices of public shame, the bridles, corsets, masks, and chains were not evenly distributed punishments. Men also faced brutal justice, from the stocks to the gallows, but the logic behind women's punishments was different. Their devices were designed not only to hurt, but to silence. They targeted speech, sexuality, and behavior, revealing a deep cultural anxiety. Societies feared not just what women did, but what women were. Why women, not men? The answer lies in the very structure of patriarchal societies. For centuries, women were seen as guardians of morality, bound to obedience and modesty. Yet at the same time, they were also viewed as inherently dangerous temptresses, gossipers, disruptors of harmony. The contradictions were impossible. Women were expected to be silent, but also blamed for speaking, obedient, but accused of cunning, loyal, but suspected of betrayal. These contradictions made women uniquely vulnerable to punishments designed to strip them of voice and dignity. The scold's bridle, for example, was not invented for thieves or rebels. It was created for wives who nagged, for women who gossiped in marketplaces, for widows who argued in court. Men might be flogged for theft, but women were punished for speech. This reveals the gendered logic clearly. Male crimes threatened property or order. Female crimes threatened hierarchy itself. To silence a woman's tongue was to reinforce the idea that she had no right to challenge authority. The fear of women's voices was rooted in cultural stereotypes. Gossip was portrayed as a female disease, a moral weakness. Proverbs and sermons warned against loose-tongued wives. Clergy thundered about Eve's transgression in the Garden of Eden, linking women's speech with original sin. To gossip, to argue, even to speak too freely, was framed as dangerous rebellion against divine and social order. Thus, the bridle became not just punishment but symbol, silence as enforced virtue. Women's sexuality was another focus of control. Iron corsets and chastity belts were not simply about pain, they symbolized fear of female desire. A woman accused of vanity, infidelity, or immorality might be forced into an iron corset that turned her femininity into torment. Men were rarely subjected to such bodily cages. The logic was clear. Women's bodies were seen as threats to family honor and social stability, and thus their bodies had to be policed through pain. Double standards abounded. Men could drink, boast, or cheat with relative impunity. Women faced humiliation for far less. A husband who shouted was considered firm. A wife who argued was bridled. A man's infidelity was often excused. A woman's suspicion of disobedience could end in public chains. The punishments revealed not justice, but imbalance. Historical records reinforce this. In England, parish courts regularly fined or bridled women for scolding, while men accused of similar disruptions faced lesser penalties. In German towns, shame masks depicting animals were almost always reserved for women accused of gossip or jealousy. In France, records describe women paraded in chains for immorality, while men charged with the same were merely fined. Across cultures, punishment reflected not equal justice, but targeted silencing of women. This gendered logic also reflected broader anxieties about power. Women in marketplaces spread news and rumors that could destabilize authority. Women in households could challenge husbands' dominance. Women in communities could shame men through words more effectively than violence. Punishments aimed at silencing women were not just about individuals, they were about suppressing collective female influence. By turning one woman into a spectacle of silence, authorities warned all others not to step beyond prescribed boundaries. Even humiliation rituals reflected this imbalance. A woman forced into a pig-shaped mask was mocked as animalistic. A man in stocks was mocked as criminal. The symbolism differed. Men's punishments emphasized justice, women's emphasized shame. The logic was not correction, but containment, ensuring women did not forget their place. It is telling that many punishments for women involved visibility. The bridle's bells, the mask's grotesque face, the chains clanking in streets all ensured that her disgrace was impossible to hide. Men's punishments often involved isolation prisons, floggings, executions. Women's punishments were about public identity, reshaping them into living warnings. The community was invited to participate, to laugh, to scorn. The woman's individuality was erased. She became nothing but her supposed crime. This focus on visibility reflected deep-seated fears. A woman who spoke too freely threatened to reveal truths, to expose hypocrisy, to question authority. A woman who expressed desire threatened the illusion of male control. A woman who resisted obedience threatened the patriarchal structure itself. The punishments revealed that these societies did not merely want women disciplined, they wanted them displayed as obedient, silent, and powerless. Thus, the devices of shame tell us more about society's fears than about women's faults. They show how patriarchy feared the female voice, the female body, and the female will. Men wielded swords, but women's words were considered equally dangerous, and so they were silenced with iron. The devices forced upon women in public were more than crude instruments of punishment. They were symbols carefully designed to broadcast a message. Iron bridles, shame masks, corsets, and chains were not just about pain, they were about meaning. They transformed women into living metaphors of silence, obedience, and submission. To understand their impact, we must look beyond the metal and leather and see the language of power they carried. The scold's bridle is perhaps the clearest example. Its physical purpose was to silence speech, but its symbolic meaning went deeper. The bridle turned the mouth, a source of voice, argument, and independence, into a site of pain. A woman forced to wear it became a walking proclamation. Her words were dangerous, her silence was law. The jingle of its bells reminded everyone that speech had consequences. Silence was not a choice, it was enforced as virtue. The iron corset likewise carried layered symbolism. Fashionable corsets were already symbols of femininity, shaping the body to ideals of beauty. But when transformed into punishment, the corset became a cage. Its spikes and weight turned curves into pain, transforming femininity into imprisonment. The message was clear: a woman's beauty could be weaponized against her, her very body reshaped into a lesson about obedience. What should have been a symbol of allure became a symbol of control. Shame masks exaggerated this symbolism. Shaped like animals, demons, or grotesque caricatures, they stripped individuality away. A gossiping wife became a donkey, a jealous woman, a snarling beast. These masks did not merely humiliate, they transformed women into symbols of vice. To wear the mask was to embody the sin. The woman was no longer herself, she was gossip incarnate, disobedience personified. The community did not just see her punished, they saw the problem mocked in physical form. Chains and shackles spoke their own language. Their clanking noise reminded everyone of captivity, reducing women to beasts of burden. Shackles were not subtle, they announced domination with every sound. A chained woman symbolized ownership, the message that her body and choices belonged not to her, but to authority. Even if the chains were temporary, their symbolism lingered. Freedom was conditional, granted only when obedience was restored. The public nature of these devices amplified their symbolism. Pain in private could be endured, but pain in public became humiliation. Humiliation turned suffering into theatre, and theatre turned punishment into power. By forcing women to carry these devices in marketplaces, at church doors, or through busy streets, society broadcast a message not just to the punished, but to all women. Disobedience would be met with spectacle. This symbolic logic aligned with patriarchal fears. Silence represented control. Noise represented danger. Beauty represented temptation. Cages represented safety. Identity represented individuality. Masks represented conformity. Each device inverted qualities feared in women. Voices were gagged, bodies restrained, faces distorted. Symbolism worked where pain alone could not. It lingered in memory, shaping behavior long after the iron was removed. These symbols also reflected authority's desire to make power visible. A ruler's authority was not abstract, it had to be seen. Punishment transformed invisible control into tangible display. Just as kings built castles and priests wore robes to signify power, bridles and masks signified obedience. Every punished woman became a monument to authority's reach, her body carrying the same message as a throne or a crown: power is absolute. Religion added weight to the symbolism. Sermons portrayed gossiping wives as sinful, echoing Eve's disobedience. Chastity belts and corsets symbolized moral purity enforced by pain. Public humiliation was framed as moral correction, as if iron and chains could cleanse the soul. Punishment became ritual, sanctified by church bells and prayers, binding cruelty to divine authority. The effectiveness of this symbolism lay in its visibility. A bridle could silence one tongue, but its true purpose was to silence dozens more. A mask mocked one woman, but it disciplined an entire community. By turning individuals into symbols, punishments multiplied their power. The woman suffered, but the crowd learned. Fear spread not through law books, but through images: the sight of a chained woman, the sound of bells on a bridle, the laughter around a mask. At its heart, the symbolism of these devices was about obedience. Obedience was not merely expected, it was dramatized. Women did not just follow rules, they embodied submission. Their silence, their shame, their chains became living displays of control. The devices ensured that obedience was not invisible compliance, but visible performance. The legacy of these symbols endures. We may no longer see iron bridles in marketplaces, but echoes remain in cultural expectations. Women are told to smile more, to speak less, to conform to beauty standards that restrain rather than free. The corset may no longer cut flesh, but body-shaping ideals still dictate femininity. The mask may be gone, but ridicule still turns women into caricatures of gossip, vanity, or desire. The symbolism of silence and control survives, reshaped, but recognizable. In the end, the devices of shame remind us that punishment is never only about pain. It is about meaning. Iron and leather were tools, but their true power lay in the stories they told, the stories of women silenced, bodies controlled, identities erased. These symbols declared that obedience was law and defiance was dangerous. They turned cruelty into language, language into spectacle, and spectacle into power. The bridles, masks, and iron corsets of the past may sit behind museum glass now. Their rusted frames remind us of cruelty that once paraded through city streets. But while the devices themselves are gone, their logic, the urge to silence, control, and humiliate women, remains alive. It has simply traded iron for subtler forms, leather for language, public squares for digital screens. The devices are invisible now, but their bite is no less sharp. Consider the legacy of enforced silence. Medieval women wore iron bridles to stop their tongues from moving. Today, women who speak too boldly are branded as nagging, bossy, or too aggressive. In offices, classrooms, and parliaments, they are interrupted more often than men, their ideas dismissed or claimed by others. The spike no longer pierces the tongue, but the sting of mockery, ridicule, and dismissal achieves the same result. The message has not changed. Speak softly or suffer consequences. Body control has also endured. The iron corset is gone, but beauty standards continue to cage women's bodies. Airbrushed images and endless advertisements dictate impossible ideals of thinness, youth, and perfection. Women starve themselves, undergo painful surgeries, or live under constant scrutiny to meet standards that echo the cruelty of spiked metal. The old corset imprisoned with iron, the modern one imprisons with shame. Public humiliation, once enacted in marketplaces, now plays out online. A woman in medieval times might be mocked in chains, her face hidden in a mask. Today, women are shamed on social media, their mistakes magnified by viral posts, their private lives paraded before millions. Digital mobs replace medieval crowds, but the logic is the same. Humiliation becomes spectacle, cruelty becomes entertainment, and the punished woman becomes a warning for all others. Even the symbolic masks remain. In the past, women were forced into animal-shaped masks that turned them into caricatures. Today, labels serve the same function. Drama queen, gold digger, slut, witch. Modern masks that reduce women to stereotypes, erasing individuality. Each label functions like a shame mask, transforming identity into caricature, ensuring that women are remembered for their faults rather than their humanity. Control over movement has also shifted but not disappeared. Chains and shackles no longer clink in the streets, but surveillance and restrictions still shape women's freedom. In some societies, strict dress codes or guardianship laws limit autonomy. In others, financial dependence or coercive relationships trap women in invisible cages. Even technology can become a modern chain, partners tracking phones, employers monitoring online activity, governments policing women's choices. The shackles are invisible, but the weight is real. The echoes of these devices are not confined to individuals, they shape culture. Medieval punishments made obedience public, turning one woman's suffering into a lesson for all. Today, viral shaming or high-profile scandals serve the same purpose. When a woman is humiliated publicly, others watch, and the warning spreads. Fear enforces silence as effectively now as it did centuries ago. Yet the persistence of these patterns also reveals resilience. Women of the past endured humiliation, but some resisted, mocking their punishers, reclaiming dignity, or whispering truths despite bridles and chains. That spirit of defiance lives on today. Movements like Me Too, campaigns for body positivity, and protests against restrictive laws are acts of collective resistance against invisible devices. Each voice raised in defiance is a reminder that silence is not destiny. The challenge of our time is recognizing these invisible devices for what they are. Because they lack iron and spikes, they are easier to dismiss. It is tempting to believe that without bridles and corsets, women are free. But freedom is not simply the absence of metal, it is the presence of dignity, autonomy, and equality. Until women can speak without ridicule, live without impossible standards, and move without invisible chains, the devices of public shame still exist, disguised but unbroken. The story of medieval punishments warns us not only of past cruelty but of present continuity. Devices may change, but the logic of control is stubborn. The scold's bridle has become the stereotype, the corset has become the diet culture, the shame mask has become the viral post. And just as in the past, these punishments are not isolated acts, they are performances, witnessed by crowds, reinforced by laughter, and multiplied by fear. To break this cycle requires more than removing the devices. It requires dismantling the logic behind them, the belief that women's voices must be tamed, that their bodies must be controlled, that their mistakes must be paraded for public entertainment. Only when these beliefs are unmasked will the echoes of the harem, the marketplace, and the town square finally fade. History reminds us that the most brutal devices were often the most ordinary to those who lived among them. The bridle was once just another tool of justice, the corset just another correction. Today's invisible devices risk the same normalization. We must recognize them not as culture or tradition, but as cruelty, because silence enforced by ridicule is still silence. Shame inflicted by crowds is still torture. And cages, whether iron or invisible, remain cages. The devices of the past sought to make women symbols of obedience. The task of the present is to transform those symbols into warnings, reminders of what happens when power fears freedom. To look at an iron bridle is not only to see cruelty, but to ask, what bridles do we tolerate today? What chains still clink unheard? What masks still distort women's faces into caricature? The medieval punishments ended because societies changed, because voices rose, because cruelty was unmasked. The same can be true now. Each act of resistance chips away at invisible iron. Each refusal to laugh at humiliation, each challenge to impossible standards, Each defense of dignity is a step toward breaking devices we no longer see but still feel. The iron has rusted, but the struggle remains. And just as women once walked through marketplaces under the weight of chains, women today still carry burdens imposed by culture, technology, and prejudice. The difference is that now we have the power to recognize them, to name them, and to end them. History shows us the devices. The future demands we dismantle them.